When I grow up, I want to be a painter.
When I grow up, I want to be a dancer.
I want to be an architect.
I want to be a teacher.
When I grow up, I want to
Ever since I was a little kid, I really wanted to paint because I like colors and I like I want to be a parakeet. Actually, my grandma told me that my mom doesn't have a lot of friends. I don't want to listen to her. I don't know why. I like to talk to
My name is Elizabeth Lamb. I work under my previous name of Elizabeth Williamsburg as a photographer. I was a photographer in the US doing senior portraits, which is not a thing in the UK, so I've switched to doing boudoir photography. The first job I remember wanting when I was a kid was to be both a ballerina and the president of the United States. So like a ballerina president. and then I switched for a while. I was into marine biology and then finally landed on creative writing and photography as things I wanted to study in university. And then when I was 18, I got a job at a photo studio. I just walked in, I saw a now hiring sign, and I walked in and I said, I'd like to work here. I had taken some photography classes in high school just as an elective to fill out my schedule. And I showed the studio manager the photos that I had done for my class, and they hired me on the spot. And after some point, I'm like, oh, wow, this could be a career. People that discouraged me the most about photography was my parents. Like, they didn't let me major in photography at university. My degree's actually in psychology, because they were like, oh, you'll never have a job as a photographer. You'll never put food on the table as a photographer. So get a job that, you know, will pay the bills. And so I switched to psychology, and I was like, I'm done with photography. I'm just going to work a 9-to-5 job like all normal people. And it was about 3 years into my career, my 9-to-5 career, that I was just absolutely miserable in the job. I hated going into work every day. And the man I was married to at the time, his name was David, he was like, well, then just quit. Because I was doing photography on the side and I'm getting more and more clients. And he's like, well, just quit your job then and do photography full time. And I was like, okay, yeah. I didn't have a studio, and I'd only learned studio lighting and how to do stuff in studio. So taking it on the road and doing like events at like weddings and bar mitzvahs and things was such a different world. I was absolutely terrified because I honestly didn't know what I was doing for all of those things. I was like, can't I just get like some portrait clients? But then I was like having people in my apartment. It was just this really tiny apartment that would just be taken over by lights and the backdrops and stuff. So it was just kind of squeezing people into the into my apartment. So that I was always very scared that they were going to be like, you're not a real business. We're shooting in your apartment. I moved to London because I met and married my current husband. And so when we did that, we talked about US versus UK. He has a much more stable job, and he also has a son, so it was a no-brainer. I have to move to the UK. He's got too many things going on in the UK to come to the US. So packed up everything, sold all the stuff, and moved to London.
So, welcome. Thank you, first of all, to all of you for joining us here this evening.
You and I.
25 years ago.
Before,
My
let alone
grandfather
competitively.
As Cassani leads on him, penalty!
My primary job is doing a research assistant for a forensic toxicology company. It's a difficult balance because I'm a contractor at the toxicology job, so when I've got a lot of time, free time, I can, work on my photography website, do portfolio building, try to get out there. But when the toxicology job is slammed with clients, then I have to kind of put the photography on the back burner for a bit. When I tell people what I do, they, much like in the US, they're way more interested in the day job than they are in the photography job. So like, I'll be like, oh yeah, I do photography, and I'll explain what I do. And then I'll say, and I also do forensic toxicology part-time. And they'll be like, ooh, tell me more about that. They don't really care about the photography so much. They take the science more seriously than the photography, because everyone's a photographer these days. We've all got cameras in our back pocket with our phones, and a lot of people didn't study art. They didn't study photography or design, and so they don't necessarily, the general public doesn't necessarily understand the difference between what I do when I create a portrait and what they do when they take a snapshot with their phone. When you're doing professional portraits, you're telling a story, and you also have a client, and so you have a goal in mind with the client, but you need to understand things like lighting and focal length and posing. It's amazing. I actually, when I get text messages from people saying, oh my God, thank you so much for my photos, I look amazing. It's hard to put into words how great it feels when someone says, oh my gosh, I didn't think I was gonna like anything out of these pictures, and I just love all of them. I couldn't choose which ones to buy. And, it feels really good. I think in general, a lot of people undervalue the arts because they don't understand that without the arts, we wouldn't have the society that we have. Like going back as far as cave paintings, which told a story and also was a history, all the way forward to music, which tells stories and makes you feel things, and is the background for all the movies that you love. It's without paintings and so on, you wouldn't have a lot of the drawings in children's books. You wouldn't have, I just saw a post recently about how some scenes in Star Wars were hand painted, and then they just added the people walking through. You wouldn't have that without painting, and without photography, the web would be like the web was in the 90s, where it's just text and very hard to look at and read. You wouldn't have brochures. You wouldn't have the visual arts are so important because they help you see things and get an understanding and an idea in a way that would take so many more words to capture. You see a lot of the AI coming up, where people are taking photographers' images, throwing them into AI and getting AI to create them as a Viking or whatever. And that's something that we could totally do in the photo studio. And so things like that are taking away from our businesses. It's a really cool tool to use when you're doing conceptual work. But when people don't even bother with that, people are like, oh, you can't tell it's not real. I'm like, oh, but you can. That's very much a challenge, getting people to see that there's still a value in traditional photography, and that things like that are actually taking away from artists. People still need to capture themselves and their families as they are right now, to kind of have that memory. One of the things I talk to my clients about is the author Chuck Palahniuk did an essay about how he worked briefly as a candy striper in a hospice, and for people with dementia. And at the end of their life, all they had was this little box of photographs of their life, and he would sit with them as his job and comfort them and talk to them and go through the pictures with them, and they'd go, oh my gosh, that girl's so beautiful, who is she? And he'd be like, well, that was you when you were younger. And that would launch a whole conversation where you could get the glimmer of the person who was there briefly. a few things that I would give as advice for upcoming artists. One would be don't undervalue yourself. I see a lot of not just photographers, but also friends who are artists who put out amazing work and then they charge almost nothing for it. There's photographers out there who will give you like a 3-hour photo session and 100 digital images for like $50. And that's so devaluing their art and the profession in general. I have friends who do amazing, almost photographic quality drawings, and they'll do a custom portrait of like your pet or whatever for, $100. And it's taking them like 12 or 20 hours to do these things, and they're charging $100. Like, they're getting paid less than minimum wage here. And I think the other thing I would say is don't give up. There are ebbs and flows. It's very feast and famine. When you hit the bumpy patch, don't give up. Don't listen to the people who say, oh, you should just give up and quit and go and get a 9-to-5. If you have to pay the bills, pushing trolleys or working at a cash point or something, go ahead. But don't give up the art. Keep working at it because your art has value.